The frozen feast, the snow had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing the forest in silence. The cabin sat at the heart of the woods, small and cozy, its chimney puffing smoke into the frosty air. Inside, the Miller family was bustling about, preparing for Thanksgiving dinner. It was their tradition to spend the holiday here, far from the noise of the city. "Pass me the potatoes," said Clara, the eldest daughter, as she stirred a large pot on the stove. Her younger brother, Tim, groaned but handed them over, too focused on his phone to complain much. "No phones at the table tonight," their father, Tom, reminded him as he chopped vegetables at the counter. "We're here to enjoy each other's company." "Dad, the table isn't set yet," Tim shot back, but he stuffed the phone into his pocket anyway. The youngest, Sophie, was setting the table with their mother, Linda. She hummed softly to herself, excited for the feast ahead. The aroma of roasting turkey and baking pies filled the room, making everyone's mouth water. Outside, the snowstorm grew stronger. The wind howled against the cabin, causing the windows to rattle. Tom glanced out at the dark woods, frowning. "Looks like a rough night out there," he said. "Good thing we're safe and warm in here," Linda replied with a smile. She lit a few candles on the table, adding to the cozy glow of the room. As they worked, an odd noise echoed from outside. It was faint at first, almost like a low growl or a distant scream. Everyone paused. "What was that?" Clara asked, her hands freezing mid-stir. "Probably just the wind," Tom said, though he didn't sound entirely sure. "This old cabin creaks a lot in storms." The family shrugged it off and continued preparing dinner. But then, an hour later, Clara noticed something strange. "Where's the cranberry sauce?" she asked, searching through the fridge. "I know I put it in here earlier." "Check again," Linda said. "I'm sure it's there." But after a thorough search, the cranberry sauce was nowhere to be found. The family brushed it off as a small mystery and carried on, but it wasn't long before other things began to disappear. First, the bread rolls vanished from the counter. Then, the carving knife went missing. By the time they noticed Sophie's favorite doll was gone, the mood had shifted. "This isn't funny," Clara said, looking pointedly at Tim. "Are you pranking us? It's not me," Tim protested. "I've been here the whole time." "Maybe we're just misplacing things," Linda suggested, though her voice sounded uncertain. The family grew uneasy. To calm everyone down, Tom suggested they finish dinner and eat together. The warmth of the meal, he hoped, would make them forget the strange occurrences. They all sat down at the table, the candles flickering softly. But as Tom began to carve the turkey, a loud thud came from outside. Everyone froze. "What was that?" Sophie whispered, her wide eyes fixed on the door. Tom got up slowly. "Stay here," he said, grabbing a flashlight. "I'll check it out." "I'm coming with you," Clara said, standing up. "No, stay with the others," Tom insisted. "I'll be quick." Reluctantly, Clara sat back down. The room was silent as they waited, every creak of the cabin making their nerves jump. The minutes dragged on until finally the door creaked open and Tom stepped back inside, brushing snow off his coat. "I didn't see anything," he said, though his face was pale. "Probably just a branch falling." But the unease lingered. Dinner continued, though no one had much of an appetite. The laughter and chatter that usually filled their Thanksgiving evenings were replaced by nervous glances and quiet chewing. Later that night, as they were cleaning up, Sophie tugged on Linda's sleeve. "Mommy, my doll is back," she said softly, holding up the toy. Linda's heart sank. The doll's dress was torn, and it was covered in mud. "Where did you find this?" Linda asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "It was on the porch," Sophie said. Tom's head snapped up. "You opened the door?" Sophie nodded, and Tom's expression darkened. "From now on, no one goes outside without telling me first. Do you understand?" Sophie nodded, looking frightened. The family locked all the doors and windows before going to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The wind continued to howl, and the strange noises from the woods seemed closer than ever. In the middle of the night, Clara woke up to the sound of footsteps. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The sound was faint but distinct, crunching through the snow outside her window. Gathering her courage, she peeked through the curtains. What she saw made her gasp. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the moonlight. It was tall and thin, with long, spindly limbs. Its face was obscured, but it was clearly staring at the cabin. Clara stumbled back from the window, her breath coming in short gasps. She ran to her parents' room and woke them up. "There's something outside," she whispered urgently. Tom grabbed the flashlight and a heavy stick, motioning for Clara to stay with Linda and the others. He stepped outside into the freezing night, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The figure was gone, but faint footprints led into the woods. Tom hesitated. He wanted to follow the tracks, but knew it wasn't safe. Instead, he returned to the cabin and double-checked the locks. "We're staying inside until morning," he said firmly. The family huddled together in the living room, too scared to return to their beds. The hours passed slowly, each sound from outside making them jump. Finally, dawn broke, casting a pale light over the snow-covered forest. Tom decided to investigate the tracks in the daylight. Clara insisted on coming with him, despite his protests. Together, they followed the footprints, which led deeper and deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser, their branches heavy with snow. "We shouldn't go too far," Tom said, glancing around nervously. But just as they were about to turn back, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center was a makeshift shelter made of branches and leaves. Scattered around it were the missing items: the cranberry sauce, the bread rolls, even Sophie's doll. But there was something else: 2 bones. Small animal bones, picked clean. Clara gagged, covering her mouth. "What is this place?" she whispered. Tom didn't answer. He grabbed her arm and pulled her away. "We're going back to the cabin," he said firmly. As they hurried back, the forest seemed to close in around them. Every shadow looked like a figure, every rustle like a footstep. By the time they reached the cabin, they were out of breath and on edge. "We're leaving," Tom announced as soon as they stepped inside. "Pack your things." "What? Why?" Linda asked. "I'll explain later." "Just do it," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The family quickly gathered their belongings. But as they prepared to leave, the strange noises began again. This time, they were louder, closer. The family froze, fear gripping them. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the wind howled into the cabin. In the doorway stood the figure Clara had seen. Its face was pale and featureless, its limbs impossibly long. It stepped inside, and the family screamed. Tom grabbed the heavy stick and swung at the creature, but it moved too fast, dodging with unnatural speed. The family scattered, each trying to find a place to hide. The creature seemed to enjoy the chase, its movements deliberate and almost playful. Clara and Tim managed to lock themselves in a bedroom, while Linda and Sophie hid in a closet. Tom continued to fight, but the creature overpowered him, knocking him unconscious. From their hiding spots, the family could hear the creature moving through the cabin, searching for them. It sniffed the air, its footsteps slow and deliberate. Hours seemed to pass as they waited, holding their breath. Finally, the noises stopped. The family waited in silence, too scared to move. When they finally emerged, the creature was gone, and so was Tom. Linda collapsed to the floor, sobbing. The remaining family members hugged each other tightly, their tears mixing with the fear and grief. Morning came again, but it brought no comfort. The snowstorm had passed. leaving the forest eerily quiet. The family decided to leave the cabin behind and find help, carrying only what they could. As they trudged through the snow, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. When they finally reached the edge of the woods, they turned back for one last look. In the distance, a pale figure stood among the trees, watching them. They didn't stop to wonder. They just kept walking, hoping they'd never see it again. Black Friday chaos. It was supposed to be a quick trip. Alice only needed a new pair of headphones, and she thought she'd take advantage of the Black Friday sales. Everyone knew Black Friday was a little wild, but she figured it wouldn't be too bad if she went early in the day. The massive mall had just opened its doors when she stepped inside. It was busy, sure, but nothing she couldn't handle. At least, that's what she thought. The first sign that something was off came when Alice entered the electronics store. People weren't just browsing, they were grabbing items off the shelves as if their lives depended on it. A woman snatched a flat-screen TV from an elderly man, who yelled in protest. Nearby, two teenagers fought over the last gaming console on display. Alice took a step back, clutching her bag tightly. She decided to keep her distance and stick to her plan, grab the headphones and get out. As Alice weaved through the crowd, she couldn't help but notice how tense everyone seemed. The air was thick with desperation, as if every shopper believed this was their one chance to buy something they couldn't live without. A man bumped into her, nearly knocking her over, but he didn't even stop to apologize. He just kept moving, his arms full of random gadgets. Alice finally made it to the headphone section, relieved to see there were still a few left. She reached for a box, but her hand collided with someone else's. She turned to see a middle-aged woman glaring at her. "I saw it first," the woman hissed. "There are more right there," Alice said, pointing to the shelf. But the woman didn't seem to care. She yanked the box out of Alice's hand and stormed off without another word. Shaking her head, Alice grabbed another pair of headphones and decided she'd seen enough. She headed for the checkout line, which stretched all the way to the back of the store. With a sigh, she got in line, clutching her purchase tightly. That's when she noticed something strange. The people in line weren't just impatient, they were eerily quiet. No one was chatting or scrolling on their phones. They all stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead with empty expressions. It gave Alice chills, but she told herself she was just imagining things. Black Friday brought out the worst in people after all. Finally, it was her turn to check out. The cashier barely looked at her as he scanned her item. His eyes were glassy, and his movements were robotic. Alice tried to make small talk, but he didn't respond. She left the store feeling uneasy, but she chalked it up to the stress of the day. She had gotten what she came for, and now it was time to go home. As Alice made her way toward the exit, she realized the mall had gotten even more crowded. People were swarming every store, their arms loaded with bags and boxes. The noise was deafening, shouts, laughter, and the constant hum of the mall's air conditioning. Alice quickened her pace, eager to escape the chaos. But then, the lights flickered. For a moment, everything went dark. When the lights came back on, the atmosphere had changed. The noise had stopped. The shoppers who had been rushing around a moment ago were now standing still, their heads tilted slightly to one side. It was as if they were listening to something only they could hear. Alice froze, her heart pounding. She took a step back, and one of the shoppers turned to look at her. His eyes were cold and empty, like he wasn't really seeing her. Then, slowly, the others began to turn as well. Dozens of eyes focused on her, and Alice felt a wave of panic. "What's going on?" she whispered to herself. She turned and started walking quickly, but the shoppers began to follow. Their footsteps were synchronized, a single sound echoing through the mall. Alice broke into a run, her pulse racing. She ducked into a clothing store and hid behind a rack of coats, trying to catch her breath. From her hiding spot, she peeked out and saw the shoppers moving past the store. They moved as one, their heads turning in unison as they scanned the area. Alice's mind raced. This wasn't normal. Something was seriously wrong. She stayed hidden until the group was gone, then slipped out of the store and headed for the nearest exit. But when she got there, the doors wouldn't open. She pushed and pulled, but it was no use. It was like the mall had locked itself down. No, 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 she muttered, backing away from the doors. She turned and saw another group of shoppers coming toward her. They moved with the same eerie precision, their eyes fixed on her. Alice ran again, dodging through the crowd. She could hear their footsteps behind her, growing louder with each passing second. She ducked into a stairwell and slammed the door shut behind her. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Alice leaned against the wall, trying to calm her breathing. She had to think. She couldn't stay in the stairwell forever, but she didn't know where to go. Every exit she'd tried was locked, and the shoppers were everywhere. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound coming from above. It was a voice, someone whispering. Alice hesitated, then started climbing the stairs. The voice grew louder as she got closer, and she realized it was coming from the top floor. When she reached the landing, she found a young man crouched in the corner, holding a walkie-talkie. "Hey," Alice said, keeping her voice low. The man looked up, his eyes wide with fear. "You're not one of them," he said. "No," Alice replied. "What's going on? Why is everyone acting like this?" The man shook his head. "I don't know. It started a couple of hours ago. People were shopping like normal, and then it was like they all snapped. Now they're connected somehow, like a hive mind. If they see you and you're not shopping, they come after you." Alice's stomach sank. "How do we get out of here?" "I've been trying to figure that out," the man said. "The exits are all locked, and the security system isn't responding. I think whatever's controlling them has taken over the mall." Alice glanced at the walkie-talkie. "Who are you talking to?" "There's a group of us," he said. "We've been trying to find a way out, but it's not safe to move around too much. They're everywhere." "Where are the others?" Alice asked. The man hesitated. "In the food court. It's the only place we've found that's somewhat safe. The hive doesn't go there for some reason." Alice nodded. "Take me to them." The man stood and led her back down the stairs. They moved cautiously, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main walkways. Alice's heart raced every time they passed a group of shoppers. The hive moved with eerie precision, scanning their surroundings as if they were searching for something or someone. When they reached the food court, Alice was relieved to see a small group of people huddled together. They looked tired and scared, but they were alive. One of them, an older woman, stepped forward and introduced herself. "I'm Karen. You must be Alice." Alice frowned. "How do you know my name?" Karen held up a phone. "We've been monitoring the mall's security cameras. We saw you trying to get out." Alice's cheeks flushed. "Do you know what's causing this?" Karen shook her head. "Not exactly, but we think it's connected to the mall's new smart system. They installed it a few weeks ago to manage security, lighting, and even the sales data. If it's been compromised, it could explain why the exits are locked and why the shoppers are acting like this." "So how do we shut it down?" Alice asked. Karen exchanged a look with the others. "The control room is on the top floor, but getting there won't be easy. The hive is concentrated in that area." Alice squared her shoulders. "We don't have a choice. If we don't stop this, we're all trapped here." The group fell silent, but eventually they nodded in agreement. Together, they began to plan their next move. It wouldn't be easy, but Alice was determined. She wasn't going to let the hive win. The journey to the control room was tense. The group moved in pairs, using walkie-talkies to stay in contact. They dodged groups of shoppers, hiding in stores and behind displays whenever the hive got too close. Each step brought them closer to their goal, but also closer to danger. When they finally reached the control room, they found the door locked. Karen worked on the keypad while the others kept watch. The hive seemed to sense that something was happening. Groups of shoppers began converging on their location, their footsteps echoing through the halls. "Hurry," Alice urged. "I'm trying," Karen snapped. The keypad beeped, and the door clicked open. The group rushed inside and locked the door behind them. The control room was filled with screens and blinking lights. Karen sat at the main console and began typing furiously. "If I can access the system, I might be able to override whatever's controlling them." The rest of the group watched anxiously as Karen worked. The hive was pounding on the door now, their movements frantic. Alice could feel the vibrations through the floor, and she knew they didn't have much time. "Got it," Karen exclaimed. The screens flickered, and a low hum filled the room. The pounding on the door stopped. Alice held her breath, waiting for something to happen. After a few moments, the shoppers outside began to disperse. Their movements were slower, more natural. It was like they were waking up from a deep sleep. The group let out a collective sigh of relief. Karen turned to Alice and smiled. "We did it." Alice nodded, her heart finally beginning to slow. The nightmare was over. For now. The Leftovers Cursed Thanksgiving is a time for family, food, and gratitude. The Johnson family loved Thanksgiving. It was the one day of the year when they all gathered under one roof. The house was filled with the smell of turkey, mashed potatoes, and pies baking in the oven. Everyone laughed, talked, and shared stories around the dining table. This year was no different, or so it seemed at first. The day started peacefully. Aunt Martha brought her famous green bean casserole, Uncle Joe brought his homemade cranberry sauce, and Grandma Louise baked 3 kinds of pie: apple, pumpkin, and pecan. The kids played outside while the adults set the table and chatted about their lives. The turkey came out of the oven golden and juicy, and everyone couldn't wait to dig in. Dinner was perfect. Plates were piled high, and conversations filled the air. They talked about old memories, plans for Christmas, and everything in between. After hours of eating and laughing, everyone leaned back in their chairs, too full to move. The only thing left to do was pack up the leftovers. That's when things took a turn. As everyone began packing food into containers, the first argument broke out. Uncle Joe wanted to take home most of the turkey. Aunt Martha said she needed it for her soup recipe. Grandma Louise insisted that the leftover turkey should stay in the house for sandwiches. Soon, everyone was raising their voices, each person claiming they deserved the biggest share. "I brought the cranberry sauce. I should get more turkey," Uncle Joe shouted. "Your cranberry sauce was too tart anyway," Aunt Martha snapped back. Even the kids joined in, arguing over who should get the last slice of pie. The tension in the room grew, and the once happy family dinner turned into chaos. In the middle of the shouting, Grandpa Henry, who had been sitting quietly, stood up. "Enough," he yelled. Everyone froze. Grandpa rarely raised his voice, so when he did, they listened. "This is ridiculous. Fighting over food. You should all be ashamed of yourself." Feeling embarrassed, the family quieted down, but the tension was still thick in the air. Grandpa Henry turned to help Grandma Louise with some dishes. As he reached for a container of gravy, someone bumped into him. The container flew out of his hands, and the thick, brown gravy splattered all over an old wooden box sitting on a nearby shelf. The room went silent. The box was an heirloom, passed down through generations. It had belonged to their great-great-grandmother, and was said to be a symbol of the family's legacy. The box had always been kept clean and polished, but now it was covered in greasy gravy. Grandma Louise gasped. "The heirloom," she cried. Everyone rushed to clean it. Aunt Martha grabbed a towel, and Uncle Joe tried to wipe it with his sleeve. But no matter how much they scrubbed, the gravy wouldn't come off. Instead, the box's surface began to change. Strange symbols appeared, glowing faintly under the gravy stains. The family stared in shock as the symbols pulsed with a dim, eerie light. "What is that?" whispered one of the kids. Grandpa Henry's face turned pale. I don't know," he said, his voice trembling. Suddenly, the room grew colder. The lights flickered, and a chill ran through everyone's spine. The symbols on the box glowed brighter, and a low hum filled the air. Then, just as quickly as it started, everything went still. The family looked at each other, unsure of what had just happened. Grandma Louise carefully picked up the box. "This isn't normal," she said. "We need to find out what's going on." Over the next few days, strange things began happening. The family's arguments grew worse. Little annoyances turned into full-blown fights. Aunt Martha burned her soup recipe for the first time in years. Uncle Joe's car broke down on his way to work. The kids couldn't sleep, plagued by nightmares of glowing symbols and cold whispers. Grandma Louise decided it was time to investigate. She opened the heirloom box, hoping to find answers. Inside, she found old letters, photographs, and a small, faded book. The book was filled with handwritten notes and strange drawings that matched the symbols on the box. "These look like curses," Grandma Louise said, flipping through the pages. "But why would this be in our family heirloom?" The family gathered around, trying to make sense of it all. Grandpa Henry suggested they visit a local historian who specialized in family artifacts. The next morning, they took the box and the book to Mr. Grayson, a knowledgeable and kind man who owned a small antique shop in town. Mr. Grayson studied the box carefully. "This is fascinating," he said. "These symbols are part of an old tradition. Some families believe they could protect their homes by placing curses on their belongings. The curse would ward off thieves and bad luck, but if the item was damaged, the curse could backfire." "Backfire?" Aunt Martha asked nervously. Mr. Grayson nodded. "Yes. If the item is mistreated, the curse could turn on the family instead. That might explain the strange things you've been experiencing." The family exchanged worried glances. Grandma Louise asked, "How do we stop it?" Mr. Grayson flipped through the small book they had brought. "There might be a way to reverse the curse," he said, "but it will take time. You'll need to uncover the history behind this box and why the curse was placed on it in the first place." Determined to save their family, the Johnsons began their search. They combed through old family records, talked to distant relatives, and pieced together bits of their history. They discovered that their great-great-grandmother had lived through hard times. She had placed the curse on the box to protect her family from misfortune during a time of war and poverty. But over the years, the true purpose of the box had been forgotten. The family had treated it as a simple heirloom, unaware of its deeper significance. The gravy spill had broken the protective bond, causing the curse to spiral out of control. With Mr. Grayson's help, the Johnsons performed a ritual to cleanse the box and break the curse. They gathered around it, holding hands and reciting words from the small book. As they finished the ritual, the symbols on the box faded, and the eerie chill in the air lifted. The family felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The curse was gone, and peace returned to their home. They apologized to each other for their fights and promised to never let small arguments come between them again. From that day on, the Johnsons treated the heirloom with respect, remembering the sacrifices of their ancestors. Thanksgiving became even more special to them not just as a time for food and laughter, but as a reminder of the importance of family and unity.